Welcome everyone to the B.E.S.T PD. I think now that the B.E.S.T standards are going to be here next year, we're all going to be making some jokes with the acronym B.E.S.T. But hopefully this will be an effective PD for you, a good experience where you dig your teeth into the B.E.S.T standards in a way that is authentic and helps you start thinking about next year, this year, because we're not even halfway through the year. We can start making some adjustments to our teaching and our curriculum selections now, so that when our students go to the next year, they're not blindsided. So that is my hope for today. We're going to look at some specific learning goals and targets, but I'm so glad you're here. I'm Chris Chaplin, and my facilitator here is Ashley Dowd, and I'm so thankful to have her as a partner. And I'm thankful that you're all here, because we have a lot of opportunities with these new standards, and we're at the ground floor. So, and like we usually do in Bradford, we start adopting and adapting quickly, more quickly than bigger districts. So let's do this. All right. So this is happening simultaneously at all the elementary schools as well, although their session might be a little different because we have different needs in elementary versus secondary. Like usual, I will share all of these resources and a recording of this after the presentation. Give me a couple days. So today, our outcomes, our learning goal is teachers will understand the structure and the purpose of the B.E.S.T standards in order to select appropriate instructional materials. Guys, we are up for ELA textbook adoption this year. In January, we'll start really that process. Today is meant to really push us to dive into the standards, because the books that we'll be selecting have to meet the needs of these standards. And some of you will be on the team to select our materials. And so we felt that all of you should have an idea of what these standards are really about before you can make an informed decision on what materials will best serve you and your students next year. So that's our learning target. The success criteria that are going to help us achieve that target are as follows. Teachers can navigate and understand the new standards, including relating B.E.S.T to the FSA. We're not going to make a crosswalk because it's not a one-to-one thing, but we will spend some time thinking about how the shift to the B.E.S.T fits in with what we know about FSA now. Then we're also going to look at how the development of standards progress through the grade levels. And then we're going to look at the coding and structure of strands, standards, and benchmarks. There's a lot of terms, a lot of organization to work out. And today, I think through our 3 activities, you will have a good idea of how these are structured. Our second success criteria is teachers can identify the major shifts of B.E.S.T, that there's a K-12 explicit focus on foundational skills such as phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension. That used to be really focused in K through 2nd, and then a little bit in 3rd through 5th, and then not at all later on. But with B.E.S.T, we do it from K to 12. So that's exciting to me as a reading coach. We're also going to focus on literary periods and historical documents and how they play in the new standards, and how focusing on history in the US and having a civics background, that's going to be a major factor. And then we're going to look at how rhetoric is introduced in grade 6 instead of grade 9. So that's going to be a big change for our middle school teachers. And then we'll look at how cursive writing is emphasized more in B.E.S.T. And specifically, students will have to be able to read a text that is in cursive. We're hypothesizing based off of the standards that's going to be something on an assessment. So that will really affect what kind of text we choose. We want to find some that are written in cursive, so students have practice reading that. And then our last success criteria, teachers can acquire the necessary knowledge and understanding to select instructional materials in January. So let's go ahead and dive in. Our first thing is really about you. We want this to be something that you participate in, not something that's done to you. This is a PD that's about learning, and we know learning needs to be active, and so you're going to be active today. So this is a cafe chat. Ms. Dowd and I experienced this at a NEFEC training a few times, and we thought it was good. It's another version of a gallery walk or a jigsaw, but it's a little more relaxed, and things aren't on the wall, it's on the table. So we're going to go ahead and do this. And so step one, each of you on the middle of your table, you have a sheet of paper that has some words on it. And these are subheadings within the standards packet. They explain the philosophy or the premises that these new standards are based on. So you're going to examine one paragraph or two that's within a subheading. The one on the example on the screen is the subheading design of the standards. And so if I'm at that table, I'm going to open up my text and read all the information under design of the standards. That's step one. You read your subheading. Step two, on your own sticky note, record your best aha or light bulb moment from reading your assigned subheading. Then after you've done this all independently, you and your team will kind of start sharing. And as a group, you'll share with each other and write a group summary statement of the premise subheading on the table paper. So we thought it was important that you not just make ahas individually, but then you kind of come together and synthesize all your information into a single statement that summarizes that subheading. So if I was sitting at this table on the screen here, I would be with my other team members summarizing design of the standards based off of my readings. And then before you move to another table, which yes, you'll be moving, I want you to leave your sticky notes beneath the summary statement so other teams can see the individual ahas you have, which resulted in the summary you wrote. So I think this is important that we're kind of constructing our knowledge about the standards together through writing, through reading, and through speaking. Step four, you'll move to another table when prompted and repeat the process. And we'll probably go to between 2 to 4 different tables during this time period. Okay, I'm going to leave it to Ashley to check if you're all ready for this activity. And I cannot wait to move to the next step when we return. All right, everyone. In about 8 minutes, we're going to get back together to our original tables and share out our experience and our insights that we picked up during this activity. So about 8 more minutes. All right, we should be heading back to our tables soon, our original tables that we started at. Okay, hopefully that was an interesting kind of eye-opening experience as you started peeling back the layers of the best standards premise. Like, what are the foundational core ideas that undergird all of the standards we're going to be teaching from? And hopefully you've gotten a sense of that now. Now, you haven't been able to see every one of these subheadings, only 2 to 4. So I'd like you now, as a whole group, to just start sharing out some of your major ahas, and more specifically, the question on the screen directs you to answer the question: how should your planning and instruction change as a result of these premises? So I want you to think about that for a moment, and then it's a free open discussion. You can raise your hands if that helps you all be organized, but let's take about 5 minutes and talk about how these premises should change our planning and our instruction next year. Okay, so hopefully you guys had a good little back and forth kind of sharing out your reactions to the premises. Let's go ahead and move on to the expectations of these standards. So can be found on page 147 of the B.E.S.T standards packet, and I think you all have access to this digitally. If not, ask Ashley to share it with you or me through email. But also, when you get this PowerPoint, anytime you see this symbol of a link, you have a link to the item presented. So here it is, and you can always access that later. But there are 6 K-12 ELA expectations, and they are overarching skills that run through every component of language arts. So these aren't standards, but these are kind of broad ideas and skills that run through everything. And they are interconnected and should be developed over time. And it's similar to how math has math principles in the FSA. These are kind of like our ELA principles, or they call them expectations. So let's go ahead and look at a few of those pretty quickly. We're not going to spend a ton of time, but let's look at them so you have some familiarity with them. So here's the 6, and there's the coding. They have EE 1.1, 2.1, 3.1, and so forth. We have citing evidence to explain and justify reasoning. That's just an overall skill that works with every standard that we're going to approach this year. Read and comprehend grade level complex text proficiently. Again, that just affects everything we do. Make inferences to support comprehension. Again, something we do all the time. Use appropriate collaborative techniques and active listening skills when engaging in discussions in a variety of situations. Again, this is a core behavior and skill we want students to have when they are learning in our classrooms. And then use the accepted rules governing a specific format to create quality work. So that's pretty general, but students need to be able to follow design rules when they're writing an essay or creating a poster or citing work using MLA citation or APA, right? That covers a wide variety of skills there. And the last one, use appropriate voice and tone when speaking or writing. And this is a big one we always have to train our students to do. How do you speak academically in a discussion? What volume, what kind of words are appropriate, that kind of thing. So again, these are the overall general ELA expectations. And the next couple slides break them down even further. And again, this information's in the B.E.S.T packet, which you could get a link to on one of the previous slides. So I'm not going to read over all these, but I'll just flash them up there so you can kind of glance at them and kind of get an idea of the progression. Because this one, cite evidence to explain and justify reasoning, the skills progress from K all the way to 12, and there's different expectations. For example, in K, they're not writing text evidence. They are just being able to orally communicate the text evidence. In 9 through 12, they're actually using specific style guides and can compare and contrast between APA and MLA or whatever style guides you're using. So there's the progression there in a nutshell. 2.1 is the reading comprehension at grade level complex texts. And this quote is in the packet, so I wanted to share it because I think it helps clarify something. In academic terms, a text is anything that conveys a set of meanings to the person who examines it. It can be a book, it can be a comic book, it can be a movie, it can be a podcast, it can be a work of art. Whatever your text is, it's a thing that holds meaning. So anything can be read, quote unquote, read by students for meaning. So there's different ways to also talk about text complexity. With this expectation, it wants students to be reading at grade level complex texts. And so text complexity is based off of 3 kind of factors. The measurable data, which is in red, the quantitative, the things you can count a quantity of. How many long sentences, how many long words with lots of syllables, those kind of data-based things. Then there's the qualitative. What kind of background knowledge does the student have to be able to access the text? And is the meaning complex? Like a poem might have not many sentences and not many long words. So quantitatively, it might be a low-level text. but then qualitatively, it might be pretty complex with a lot of background knowledge for the student to know to be able to make meaning from it. And then last but not least is the reader and the task. So complexity could be enhanced by the task that you have the students do with the text. I used to use picture books in my AP class, which you might say, what? It's AP, it should be like Shakespeare. But my task was very complex, and they were synthesizing the picture books with other texts, which made the task even more complex. So quick little talk about text complexity, because that's one of our major expectations. Our next one is make inferences. I think I don't need to say much about that. Our students need to be able to use clues from the text to infer meaning. Next is use collaborative techniques and listening skills. You can see there's a progression here. In kindergarten, they're just learning to listen to one another respectfully. In grades 3 through 12, where we're learning to read, or when we're reading to learn, they have to have these deep academic conversations. And expectation 5, they can work in a group and they can talk together and they can create a specific outcome that follows the format that you're asking. And our last one is students can use appropriate voice and tone. And so we're talking about formal language and informal language. So Mrs. Clark, she made this slide, and I thought it was a brilliant slide because it really helps our brain transition over from FSA or laughs to BEST. And so on the left side here, you have these strands from FSA. Now, us in secondary, we didn't really have the foundational skills strand at all, but we had reading literature, reading information, speaking, listening, writing, and language. So we don't have those same strands anymore. For BEST to the right, we have 4 strands, K to 12. It's all the same strands. And as we go and look into the standards deeper today, you'll see that some of our previous strands are combined or split in half and rearranged in the new standards. So it'll be interesting to see that. You could probably predict that speaking, listening, and writing, and maybe even some of language, will be in the communication strand in BEST. And then language, part of language, and a little bit of reading literature will be in vocabulary, because we had vocabulary standards in reading literature and in reading informational text. So we have some work to do to reorient our brains and how how the skills are organized in these new strands. The skills aren't new though. They're just organized differently. So these are our strands. And what I want to just point out is that these strands offer some really great opportunities for our students and for you as a teacher to continue learning and growing about your content area. As English teachers in secondary, we don't really deal with the foundations of reading, but we should, because we all know many of our students are years behind in their reading. So we need to know the foundations and how to fill those gaps that the students have. So the foundation strand, I think, is most important here to highlight because it includes remediation standards for secondary students. This is going to be creating equity for our students, giving us expectations so that we can meet the needs of our students. The reading strand is divided into 3 different standards: reading prose and poetry, reading informational text, and reading across genres. So that one's kind of different, and we'll have to look at that today. The communication strand has 5 different standards, and they are communicating through writing, communicating orally, following conventions, researching, and creating and collaborating. I love how all of those are verbs, very active. And then our last strand is vocabulary, and this has just one standard: finding meaning. So we know that vocabulary is a building block of knowledge and essential to a thorough understanding of a text. And I've been kind of harping on word analysis skills and morphemes a lot lately. So I'm excited to really dig into that and apply that next year and this year for sure. So we all know how the standards were coded last year. LAFS 910.RL.1.2, right? There's a standard, and that's the one about theme. So we have a different coding system we have to get used to now. And so this is what it is. We have the subject code, ours is ELA. Then we have the grade level. Then we have the strand, which this one is reading, as you can see my key over here. And then we have the standard. And then we have the benchmark. So let's go ahead and explore some of this. I'm going to model an activity you'll be doing in a little bit with your teams. And then I'll finally stop talking a little bit. So for strands, we have 4 strands, like I said. Let me get out of the presentation here so I can manipulate the slide. And this is what you'll be doing in an activity later. So I'm going to go ahead and put my strands over here. I'm organizing them on this organizer. And I know, just because I've spent a lot of time in this presentation, they go foundations, reading, communication, and vocabulary. Okay, I'm going to start dropping in the standards that go with the foundations. And the purpose of this is to kind of give you an idea of how the strands and the standards are sorted and get familiar with the language, because we have strands, we have standards, and then we're going to have benchmarks for each standard. So it's a little different than FSA, and I just want you to get used to it. And I'm going to model this part for you because you'll be doing the benchmarks later. Okay, so my foundations first has this one here, and that is learning, applying foundational reading skills. And then we have applying foundational skills for secondary students. So there's 2 standards for the foundational strand. And then for reading, we have reading in prose and reading informational text, and then reading across genre. So there's my 3 standards for the reading strand. For communication, it has the most standards. There's 5 standards for communication. So communicating orally, I think, is in there. Makes sense. Communicating through writing. Makes sense to me. I think also the conventions. and researching and creating and collaborating. So this is all the standards for communication strand. And then vocabulary is easy, has one standard, finding meaning. Okay, so now that I've gone through that kind of situation, this is the situation you're going to find yourself in next, where you're going to have this information set up already. You're going to have your strands set up and the standards that go with them. And then you're going to have to sort the benchmarks that go within these standards. As you can see, learning and applying foundational reading skills has 4 separate standards. But researching only has 1 standard. Collaborating has only 2 standards. Finding meaning has 3. Communicating orally, 5. And so hopefully that gives you the idea that I've modeled this process, but I really want you to get into the nitty-gritty details as you wrestle and have productive struggle with the standards. And if you don't get the right answer, that's okay. We're just playing right now with the standards, trying to get in our brain recalibrated to a new organizational system. So with that said, let's take a 5-minute break before you go and sort the benchmarks. So get up, stretch, go to the bathroom, and make sure you have a Chromebook out, because you will need to be able to do this activity on a Chromebook in the same way that I just did. You're going to be dragging and dropping blocks. So 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Okay, and we're back. So hopefully that was a good little break. Now we're going to work on sorting the benchmarks. We sorted the strands and the standards, but now we're going to sort the benchmarks. And that's you. You're going to be an active participant in this part. You're going to simply drag and drop benchmark blocks onto this graphic organizer. And as you can see, I'm using this from NEFEC and a training that Ashley Dowd and I went to. So it looks a little different than the one we just used, but it's the same process. I've identified the reading strand, the communication strand, and the standard, and then you're going to drop the benchmark blocks into these open spaces. So consider how the benchmark blocks fit into the different strands and standards. Talk with your team and be open to productive struggle as you work to see how the benchmarks are organized within the strands and standards. This is going to be tough. It's been tough for us as we've been kind of, okay, how does this work now? What's a strand versus a standard versus a benchmark? This is what I've had to go through, and Ashley and the other coaches throughout the district to kind of wrap our heads around it. And we wanted to share that experience with you. In a moment, I'm going to have your facilitator assign you a team, and the teams are represented by these different characters. And as you can see, these characters take you to a link. So if I'm assigned in Team Spock, I'm going to go to the PowerPoint and click Spock, and I'll be taken to Spock's slide. Now you are operating on one of two slides. So the first slide is the first two strands, foundations and vocabulary. And I'll have to exit out of the presentation so I can, modify it and drag these and drop them. Put that back. And then you all have two slides to be working with. So the very next slide after your first slide has the next strands, reading and communication. And so you would be dragging and dropping from the side here. All your drops, your benchmark blocks are out there. Make sure your screen is as wide as possible and you're set to maybe 100% zoom, so you can see all your benchmark blocks here out to the side, and you'll just drag and drop. That is not correct, so don't take that as an answer. So you'll spend some time working through both pages that are assigned to your team. You can see this is the Michael Scott. Michael Scott has 2. Mickey Mouse has 2. Snoopy has 2. You all have 2. And just to make sure you're on the right page, you have the character in the top right corner on both of your assigned slides, but also your benchmark blocks are all the same color. So all of Amy Poehler's or Leslie Knope's slides have purple benchmark blocks, and all of Spock's have blue benchmark blocks. So Ashley, go ahead and assign what team your teachers are in, and then you guys, I recommend you kind of work together, all looking at your own Chromebooks, but you're all at the same table working through this. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. I'm going to leave the instructions up while you go through and start sorting the benchmarks. All right, we're going to wrap up in about a minute. So start wrapping up your work. And even if you haven't finished, that's okay. You've played and with the benchmarks and started to get a feel for how they're organized. All right, we're back, and hopefully you've had some time to experience the productive struggle that I experienced and with Ashley 2 weeks ago when we went through a version of this training and activity. So let's go ahead and move on. Let me just get through all these slides here. So let's go ahead and share out our experience because you've talked with your group members, but let's talk with the other groups. What challenges did you have? What ahas about how the benchmarks were organized did you come away with? And how does this organization differ the most from FSA? And again, we know you're processing this right now, and it might be almost a little too much, like drinking out of a fire hose. But it's important for us to process our thinking so it's just not going in and out, and we're getting to the next thing. So take a moment, process your thinking, and share out using these questions to kind of inspire your responses. Okay, guys, hopefully you had some interesting comments to share and you kind of empathize with each other and the struggle that you might have had sorting those benchmarks. So now I'm going to give you the answers. Here's the organization of the standards and the strands and the benchmarks. And we're not going to have them up there the whole time. And again, you can access this PowerPoint at a later date when you get it from me. But here's the general layout of the foundation strand. You can see secondary and elementary are similar, but there is some differences. Here's the reading strand. This one threw me off, interpreting figurative language. I wanted that to be up here with prose and poetry, but I think I understand that it's here because it's not just figurative language is not just used in prose and poetry. It's used in any kind of text. So maybe that's why they put it across the genres. Communication strand. Yeah, and it looks like our speaking and listening standards, our writing standards, and even some of our language standards are found here in this communication strand. It's kind of a catch-all of a bunch of different FSA standards. And then vocabulary. So hopefully you guys got that. And morphology, man, I'm so glad I've been really talking about that because now it's its own benchmark that we're going to be focusing on. So if you haven't yet used my word analysis PowerPoint, start using it. Ask the people around you that have been using it, like Mr. Milligan or Mrs. Durbin, and see how they've used it in their classroom. Okay, so we're on to another activity. And of course, just like the last one, I'm going to demonstrate or model an example of it, and then you are going to go ahead and do it yourself. But this time, do it physically with paper that Miss Dowd has passed out. And we're going to look at how benchmarks progress throughout the grade levels. And you're going to look at benchmarks from 5th grade to 12th grade, just to kind of see how the students' skills should be evolving over time. So when you're planning, you know what they should be able to do next year and what they should have been able to do the year before. And really, now we'll be able to know next year's 6th graders are going to have a gap because they won't have had what last year, what the 5th graders should have in B.E.S.T. So lots to consider with this, but for now, we're just looking at the progression. So each team is going to be given a benchmark progression packet, and then you're going to carefully read over all the benchmarks and determine the correct progressive order. After that time is given, then you're going to stand up with your team and hold all the benchmarks up for the rest of the room to see, and you're going to read them out loud, just one person at a time, progressively going through, just so we can all get a sense of how these things evolve through the grades. So I'm going to do an example for morphology. And as a whole group, you know, if I was there with you, I would do this with you. But for now, I'm just going to do a think aloud. And honestly, I didn't look up the answers ahead of time for this, and I don't have them in front of me. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to have productive struggle just like you. So to be able to manipulate the slide, I'm going to get out of it and move this circle out of the way. So let's see. We have identify and use base words and affixes to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words in grade level context. That sounds more advanced than a starting point. I want to find my starting point. Ask and answer questions about unfamiliar words in grade level content. Okay, I'm going to put that at the beginning. Let's see, what do I have here? This is about Greek and Latin roots. So that's going to come before that here. I'm not sure where it's going to go on the progression, but apply knowledge, determine the meaning of unfamiliar words. And so these two, All right, it looks like I'm going to have here identify and use base words and affixes to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words in grade level contexts. All right, and then, so then I'm going to go to this one here. Identify and use frequently occurring base words and their common. So now we're identifying that this thing exists, but now we're looking at the frequently occurring ones. And again, I'm just guessing here. Apply and identify and apply knowledge of common Greek and Latin roots, base words, and affixes to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words in grade level content. All right, so that seems to come next. And now we're done identifying, we're just applying knowledge. And then we're applying knowledge here. And this one takes it to a next step because it's recognizing connection between affixes and parts of speech to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words in grade level context. So I don't know if this is right, but that's kind of the process you're going to go through. But with physical paper, you as a team will talk together and try to kind of see if you can see the thread that evolves from standard to standard in the progression. So here's the answers. Let's see how I did. So I put this at the last, but really it should have been here. So I got a few wrong in the upper grades. Interesting. Okay. See, this is what I want you to experience, and you'll have a better idea because you'll go through that struggle too. So let's take a moment. Hopefully Miss Dowd has handed out your progressions. Let's take about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 8 minutes to read through all the standards or read through the benchmarks and put them in the correct progressive order. Okay, guys, now that you've gone through and had conversations about this set of standards and how they progress, it might not be perfect, but that's okay. We're struggling through and we're learning and making connections in our brains. So I would like you to stand up and hold your benchmarks out in a progressive order and read them out to the whole group. So we kind of get a feel for how these things progress over time. And this is the jigsaw part where we're kind of coming back together and sharing out all the information to everyone. So let's take about 5 to 7 minutes to share out with the whole group what we've discovered about the progressions. Okay. So hopefully that was a little eye-opening on how the different benchmarks evolve or progress from 5th grade to 12th grade. And you can start thinking about that as you're planning right now. How can you plan ahead to fill some of those gaps ahead of time? So now we're going to share out for the last time because we're almost done. What challenges did you have during this benchmark progression jigsaw? What ahas did you have? How might these progressions suggest gaps in learning the students might have as we transition to BEST next year? So that's everything I've said, but I just wanted to read it clearly from the screen. Let's go ahead and have a 5-minute discussion, and then we're going to close out with some resources that I'm going to give you. There's a new standards app with both FSA and BEST on it, so that's really helpful. And then we'll close out with a survey. All right, let's take about 4 or 5 minutes and share your reflection on this benchmark progression jigsaw. Really, what did you learn? Okay, so thank you so much for sharing out. And again, we only can learn through socially constructed knowledge, and we're kind of constructing that together today. So I wanted to share some resources to you. And again, when you get this PowerPoint, all the links are active, so you can get that. But if you go to your app store on your phone, you can search for the CPOMS app and go ahead and download that. And you could get rid of the Florida standards app that we used to use. But this one has both FSA and BEST on it. So it kind of covers all of the bases right now as we're in this weird transition time. So that is one resource I wanted to share with you from FLDOE. Another resource is from our friends at NEFEC, and they have a data visualization tool which can show the progression vertically and horizontally of all the standards. And you can select the different strands that you want to look at and the grade and the benchmarks. And it's a helpful tool as you're exploring how these things all connect to each other. So that's something to play around with in the future too. The timeline. The state is advertising this transition to BEST as the most aggressive transition in Florida education. It's done in like 2 or 3 years instead of, I think Common Core started really people talking about it in 2012, but we didn't have a test for it until 2014. And it was just a long process. Here, we're beginning adoption for ELA this year, K-12. We're still using the current standards this year, but we're beginning professional development for the new standards. And that's what today's about. Our curriculum is based off of FSA, and our assessments are still based off of FSA this year. Next year, we're continuing professional development on BEST, and we're using them. We're applying them in the classroom. We're not doing anything with curriculum because we have already chosen it, this year. So we'll be using our curriculum that's meant for BEST next year. And that's what this says as well. But we're still using the FSA standards for the test. And part of your brain's like, wait, we're teaching one set of standards, but we're being tested on another. It's all the same exact skills. Remember, it's just organized in different ways. So don't worry about that too much. Professional development continues in 2022, and so do the standards. And we're implementing fully K-12. And then 2022 is when we have an assessment that's on the BEST standards. So basically from this year, we have 1 year to really feel them out. It's like a trial year, and then we're being tested on them. So it's a really quick turnaround, and we're going to be pretty aggressive next year on trying to really implement them in the classroom, to feel them out, to feel out all the bugs, to figure them out as quickly as we can, knowing it's going to be messy, it's going to be a little stressful, but hopefully we can do it together, and we'll do it. If we do it together, we're going to be fine, because it's just standards. It's not the end of the world. We can do this. And honestly, I think they offer exciting opportunities for our students. Unfortunately, we just have to remold our brain the way we think about the standards and how they're organized, but we can do that. So hopefully we have started remolding our brain a little bit. Hopefully we've met our learning target, which is that you'll understand the structure and the shifts of the BEST standards so that we can make informed decisions when we select instructional materials in January. Hopefully you feel successful with these criteria, that you can kind of understand how to navigate the new standards, how they relate to FSA, how they're organized, and how they progress over time throughout the grades. And hopefully you feel more comfortable with identifying the shifts in BEST, that we're putting a focus finally back into foundational skills, not just K-2, but K-12. We're going to give the kids what they need, the foundations, if they're missing them. We're also going to focus on literary periods and historical documents. We're going to look at U.S. history and civics background knowledge. We really got to beef up the background knowledge of our students. We're going to introduce rhetoric in grade 6. We are going to become familiarized with cursive. And we didn't really look at that today, but that's something that should be in the back of your head. We don't really know how that's going to translate to an assessment yet, but I'm assuming they're going to have to be able to read an excerpt that's in cursive. And then finally, I hope you acquired the necessary knowledge and understanding to now look at instructional materials when the time comes and see how it matches or meets the needs of these new standards. Now, this comes from Ashley Dowd. She has this tool called Mentimeter. So I'm going to let her kind of lead this portion of it. I've never used Mentimeter before. I'm going to have to play with it at some point. But you can see the URL right here, www.mentimeter.com. And I think Ms. Dowd will share out a code, and it'll allow you to create a Wordle. And your Wordle is going to be in response to this question. What is your overall aha from today's examination of the BEST standards? Keep it short, keep it pithy, to the point, and we'll see how we all kind of coalesce as learners today from this experience. So go ahead, let's take a few minutes to do the Mentimeter activity, and then we'll close out with a survey. Okay, so hopefully that gave us a good snapshot of what we're all taking away immediately following this professional development opportunity. So, what question and responses do you still have? You can email me at my email address. And hopefully, I'll be around more in person starting soon, I hope and pray. But right now, I would love for you to hold your phone up and use your camera app to access this QR code, and that'll take you to this survey. Now, if it opens up and you're able to edit it, just click the little eyeball in the corner here. That'll make it so that you're not in the editing mode. And then you can give us some feedback. Because you know what? Ashley and I are teachers, and we need feedback to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can possibly do for you. So go ahead, take a moment and give me some feedback, give Ashley some feedback, give the other coaches in the district feedback who made this presentation, so that we can better serve you in the future and know what you want to learn next. And also pay attention to your emails. We'll be giving your follow-up instructions later so you can get as many recertification points as you can from the time you spent today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I cannot wait to see you in person and talk more about B.E.S.T.